we face today, which is getting this economy growing so we get people back to work and creating the revenue the right way with economic growth to help us address our deficit and our debt. With that, I yield back to the esteemed senator from Texas.
Mr. President, can I ask how much time remains in our
20 minutes.
I would yield to the distinguished senator from Iowa for any comments he cares to make.
Thank you. I've been here and listened to the process that we've discussed.
Senator from Iowa.
I've been here and listened to the process about why this bill won't be taken up now. I would like to speak to the merits of the legislation and the importance of getting it passed. And I, not only as a senator from Iowa, but as ranking minority member of the Committee of Jurisdiction, the Judiciary Committee, I think this is a very good piece of legislation. I think it ought to be passed, and I compliment the senator from Texas for leading this debate. I'm proud to support STEM Jobs Act, a bill passed by the House of Representatives last week. This bill would make available up to 55,000 green cards each year for foreign students who have received doctorates or master's degrees in science, technology, engineering, and math from any U.S. university. The bill wouldn't increase overall immigration levels, but rather would move our immigration system towards one in which we reward the best and the brightest of the world with a chance to remain, live, and work in this country. Without a doubt, our immigration system is flawed. I have long argued that we need to enhance and expand legal avenues for U.S. employers to hire foreign workers. While I'm a champion of rooting out fraud and abuse for many of our visa programs, I'm also supportive of finding ways to allow people to enter this country through legal channels. It makes sense to allow foreign students who have trained and educated on U.S. soil to remain here. These students have advanced degrees in science, technology, engineering, math, and this bill will ensure that we keep highly skilled and sought-after students here for employers in need. Our economy can't wait. It shouldn't have to wait. We need to enact solutions today that create economic growth. We also have no reason to wait for next year's likely debate on immigration. Attracting and retaining high-skilled workers shouldn't be a partisan issue. The senior member from New York has a similar proposal to grant green cards to STEM students. We've heard his argument for that bill today. I can only assume that many people on the other side of the aisle would support this bill if the majority leader gave it a chance. Nearly 30 Democrats in the House crossed the aisle to help this bill pass. Finally, as we look ahead to immigration reform, it will be important to consider ways our policy benefits future generations, not just solve the problems for a day. Our immigration system should be structured in a way to recruit people with skills in the STEM fields. This bill is a good first step in changing our system to a merit-based system. Enhancing our legal immigration channels should be a top priority, and I'm committed to working on ways to do that for all sectors of the economy. I hope the majority will reconsider the request that was rejected a few minutes ago and allow the Senate to call up and pass the STEM Jobs Act and send it to the President. It would be a signal to the American people that we can work together to enact needed immigration reform, and I thank the President from Texas once again.
Mr. President.
President from Texas. Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I appreciate the remarks of the distinguished senator from Iowa as well as North Dakota and Kentucky. You know, I think what people find so maddening about Congress and Washington, D.C. is even when we agree, we still can't seem to get anything done. How is it that we could agree on the importance of additional STEM card, green cards, and still not be able to get anything done? And this is about not what's perfect, but this is about what is possible given what has happened in the House of Representatives. We could do this. We could do this today and send it to the President of the United States in the next couple of days so he could sign it. The question is, how many more years is going to pass while we have these highly qualified students who graduate from our own colleges and universities with master's degrees and PhDs in science, technology, engineering, and math? How many years are we going to let this go before we finally address the problem? Now, I realize there's other things people would like to do, other legislation they would like to have considered, but this has actually passed the House of Representatives. Well, the senator from New York, I remember the hearing we had in the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration, of which I'm the ranking member, and he said this at that time. This wouldn't be any surprise to him. These are his own words. This is consistent with what he said on the floor. He said, if we do not enact an immigration policy that continues to attract the world's best minds, we will cease to be the world's economic leader. That's why I call this a self-inflicted wound. Why in the world, if we agree that this is important, if we agree that American workers should get the right of first refusal, but if there are not sufficient American workers with the qualification in these important fields, why in the world would we not allow the creation of jobs and new enterprises that would come with the STEM Jobs Act that's passed the House? I have a series of letters, Mr. President, one from the chancellors of the University of Texas System, Texas A&M, Texas Tech University System, the University of Houston System, the University of North Texas, and this Texas State University System in support of STEM legislation. I also have a letter from Rice University President David LeBron supporting this same type of legislation. I have a letter dated June the 25th, 2012, addressed to President Obama, Leader Reid, Leader McConnell, Speaker Boehner, and Leader Pelosi at the time, from the Partnership for a New American Economy, signed by the presidents or chancellors of 42 public and private universities. I have a letter to Congress from the Information Technology Industry Council, the Partnership for a New American Economy, and the United States Chamber of Commerce, supporting STEM immigration reform, like this bill. I have another letter dated November the 15th, 2012, to members of Congress from the American Council on International Personnel and the Society for Human Resource Management, supporting this type of STEM legislation. I have another letter dated September the 19th, 2012, to Speaker Boehner, Leader Cantor, Whip McCarthy, Minority Leader Pelosi, Minority Whip Hoyer from Connect, a UC San Diego tech transfer commercialization enterprise. Mr. President, I have all of these letters which I've referenced, which I would now ask unanimous consent that they may be made a part of the record.
Without objection.
And lest I offend my good friends at Baylor University in Waco, Texas, Mr. President, I did overlook a letter that we got from the president of that university, which I'd also ask unanimous consent to be made part of the record.
Without objection.
Well, Mr. President, I think the record should be clear that our side of the aisle believes we should act today and not wait and not delay further this important STEM Jobs Act, for the very reason I said earlier, that it will help job creators and entrepreneurs. The reason why STEM visas are particularly powerful is because these individuals with this special expertise in math, technology, engineering, and the like, that they are uniquely qualified to be able to start up new enterprises and to attract and create jobs for other people. In other words, there is a multiplier effect for every one of the 55,000 green cards that would be created by this act. There are hundreds of thousands of people who would enjoy jobs as a result of the economic activity here in this country. Mr. President, I hope we don't sacrifice another crop of science, technology, and engineering graduates in the hope that we can get the perfect immigration bill. In fact, we know this is a difficult area in which to legislate, and both sides of the aisle know that we need to deal with all of the different facets of our broken immigration system. But this bill is passed the House. It's here and now. We could pass it today by unanimous consent, but for the objection of our friends across the aisle, and the objection, amazingly enough, of the President of the United States, who he himself has claimed for at least the last 4 years that he's in favor of immigration reform. It's also important in terms of being a confidence builder, in terms of the acceptance of this legislation by the American people. The American people are justifiably skeptical of Congress passing another omnibus or comprehensive piece of legislation. We've tried that before, and we found out that even if people have read bills of going into the thousands of pages in length, that many times there are unintended consequences. And so I believe it's very important that we start with this important STEM Jobs Act, that we demonstrate that we're worthy of the confidence and trust of the American people when it comes to addressing our broken immigration system in an area where we have consensus, like the STEM jobs field. And I tell my colleagues, you have my personal commitment that I will be there to work with you to deal with other parts of our broken immigration system as we go forward. But the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to start here. If we can't pass this legislation, Mr. President, and I am skeptical based upon the objection that we've heard here today, I wonder if we will ever be able to pass immigration reform. If we can't do this consensus bill, tell me one other piece of legislation that we could pass in this field by agreement of the political parties and send on to the President. Indeed, I think there is room to wonder whether some people in this chamber would prefer to have this an issue they can wield in the next election rather than to join together on a bipartisan basis and to solve what's broken in our immigration system. Let's start here. Let's build on this. We can do it today if we can just somehow avoid the objections and to pass this legislation that's been passed by the House, that passes the STEM visa bill. It keeps families together. It represents values that I would think both sides of the aisle would applaud. With that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
So we're waiting for senators to come back to the floor to speak about this trade bill, this bill to normalize trade with Russia. In 1974, Congress passed a measure that restricted trade with Russia because it was stopping people from leaving the country during the Soviet era. Russia joined the World Trade Organization in August, but the U.S. trade barriers are still in effect. The House has already passed this measure, and we expect senators to continue their discussion this afternoon. Live coverage, as always, right here on C-SPAN 2.
unanimous consent, the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, middle-class families in our country today are paying very close attention to what we are doing here in Washington, D.C. They really understand what is at stake. They know that the impact our decisions will have on their lives, and they keep hoping that their elected officials will finally come together around a budget deal that works for them. Less than a month ago, we concluded an election season that engaged our nation in a conversation about this very issue. Candidates for the presidency and for the Senate on down all laid out their positions on some of the key questions that we are now hoping to answer. Should the middle-class tax cuts be extended? Should the Bush tax cuts on the rich end? Should we end the Medicare guarantee for our seniors in the next generation? Well, those big questions were discussed, argued, and clear positions were taken, and voters went to polling places on Election Day to render their verdict. And, Mr. President, the outcome was clear. Candidates who stood up for the middle class won. Candidates who advocated for our seniors came out ahead. And in exit polls across the country, voters made very clear that they strongly supported the idea that the wealthy should pay higher tax rates in their fair share. And everyone, Democrat, Republican, independent, wealthy, low income, middle class, students, workers, retirees, older, younger, and in between, everyone supports extending the tax cuts for the middle class. Nobody thinks that the taxes should go up for 98% of our workers and 97% of our small business owners. So, Mr. President, this ought to be easy. The American people just weighed in supporting a continuation of the Bush tax cuts for the middle class. It's a policy Democrats and Republicans agree on, and it would cushion millions of middle-class families across the country from a significant portion of the upcoming so-called fiscal cliff. So why isn't it already in law? Why aren't middle-class families already able to feel confident in their taxes not going up? Well, for one reason, and one reason alone. House Republicans continue to hold the middle class hostage in a desperate and deeply misguided attempt to buck the will of the people, ignore the results of this election, and protect the wealthiest Americans from paying their fair share. That's really all there is to it. Mr. President, if Republicans truly cared about keeping taxes low for the middle class, they can do it right now. The Senate passed a bill that would extend the tax cuts for 98% of families and 97% of workers. President Obama said he'd sign it into law. He even showed us the pen. And all the House has to do is let this bill come up for a vote, pass it, and middle-class families can go into these holidays with the certainty they deserve. Mr. President, I want to be very clear about something because some of my Republican colleagues seem intent on confusing the issue. Republicans don't have to support taxes going up on the rich in order to vote for our bill to keep taxes low on the middle class. Let me repeat that. Republicans can believe that the Bush tax cuts for the rich should be extended. They can remain committed to fighting for that misguided policy, in my opinion, and they can still vote on the portion of the tax cuts we all agree should be extended to the middle class. Then middle-class families would win. We would have worked together to extend tax cuts for 98% of workers and 97% of small business owners. And then, when the middle class is taken care of, I'd be happy to engage my Republican colleagues in a debate about extending the Bush tax cuts for the top 2%. But the first step, the most obvious step, is for the Republican House to take the 98% both sides agree on, pass our Senate bill, and send it to the President for his signature. Now, Mr. President, recently there have been some cracks in the Republican rhetorical armor that has held fast against compromise for years. More and more Republicans have begun to accept in their rhetoric what Democrats and, frankly, every bipartisan group that has examined this issue have known all along. A deficit deal is going to have to be balanced. It's going to have to include new revenue from the wealthiest Americans. Now, Grover Norquist calls these impure thoughts, but to most Americans, it's common sense. Now the onus is on Republicans, and especially their leadership, to follow this encouraging rhetoric with some action. And, Mr. President, so far that has been lacking. The lengths to which Republicans are now going in order to protect the rich from paying higher rates would be comical if it weren't so detrimental. They say they've accepted that revenue needs to be on the table. But then the proposal that Speaker Boehner made to the President would actually cut rates for the rich. It lacks any details about where that claimed revenue would come from, and just as an independent analyst confirmed about the Ryan plan, and just like we saw in the Romney plan, when you're talking about simply closing loopholes and ending deductions, either the math doesn't add up or the middle class ends up bearing the entire burden. Republicans are tying themselves up in knots to avoid the obvious. Easiest way to raise revenue from the wealthiest Americans is simply to allow the Bush tax cuts for the top 2% to expire as scheduled. That's what the Democrats want. It's what the American people support, and it would move us a long way towards balanced and bipartisan deal we're all working to get to. Mr. President, my colleague in the House of Representatives, Minority Leader Pelosi, is circulating a discharge petition to bring the Senate bill to the House floor. I strongly support this move, and I urge House Republicans to sign on and allow this legislation to come to the floor for a vote. Mr. President, Democrats have proven we are willing to make the tough compromises that a balanced and bipartisan deal will require. And we've been very clear we will not allow Republicans to push through a bad deal that forces seniors and the middle class to bear this burden all alone. So I'm hopeful that Speaker Boehner and House Republicans will decide to stop holding the middle class hostage, allow the Senate bill to come to the floor, put it up for a vote, and give our middle class families the tax cuts we all agree on. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President, I ask the proceedings under the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to address a challenging situation in Mali. Mali is a West African country, a country of nearly 500,000 square miles, a vast country that stretches from the Sahara Desert to the Niger River area and is home to roughly 15 million people. Yet it's not at the top of the list of concerns for many Americans. Mr. President, this spring, back in March, a rogue element in Mali's security forces launched a coup and forcefully overthrew a long-standing democratically elected government in the nation of Mali, our ally. This may seem inconsequential to the average American, but it could have big implications for our security as well as that of our regional and global allies. Because in the power vacuum that was created in that spring coup, al-Qaeda saw an opportunity, and they stepped in. 3 different extremist groups, all linked to or controlled by al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, known as AQIM, now control an area the size of Texas in the northern part of Mali. They succeeded in fracturing a formerly stable democracy and contributing to broad security, political, and humanitarian crises that I believe have grave implications for the Sahel region and for America's interests. To put it simply, Mr. President, this matters. Mali, a relatively strong democracy for more than 2 decades and an ally of the United States, is now embroiled in turmoil. The United States, in partnership with the international community, must show leadership in helping it rebuild its democracy and restore its territorial integrity by reclaiming northern Mali from terrorists and extremists. So this morning, as the chair of the African Affairs Subcommittee of the Foreign Relations Committee on which we serve, Mr. President, I chaired a hearing to assess developments and the path forward for U.S. policy in Mali. What I heard from our experts, from the Department of Defense, from the State Department, from USAID, as well as a range of outside experts and one witness who testified from Bamako, the capital of Mali, was of real concern to me. Northern Mali today is the largest terrorist-controlled area in the world. In the north, extremists have imposed a harsh and strict version of Sharia or Islamic law and committed gross violations of human rights. Many folks have heard of Timbuktu, but don't know that it is an ancient city in northern Mali, a site where these Islamic extremists have behaved much as the Taliban did in Afghanistan before 9/11, destroying sacred, religious, and historic artifacts in Timbuktu, imposing a harsh version of Sharia that has meant amputations, stonings, violations of women's rights, of free speech and religious free exercise rights, fundamentally changing the tolerant and inclusive history of Mali, and creating with it a humanitarian crisis as more than 400,000 Malians have fled, either internally displaced within Mali or going into neighboring countries as refugees. With growing ties between these terrorists and Nigeria, Libya, and throughout the region, AQIM, we believe, may now use its safe haven in northern Mali to plan for regional or transnational terrorist attacks. And just as we should not have ignored developments in Afghanistan, which seemed a remote and troubled country when the Taliban took it over more than a dozen years ago, so too we would ignore the chaos in northern Mali at our peril. In fact, Secretary Clinton has recently said that Mali has now become a powder keg of potential instability in the region and beyond. The top American military commander in Africa, General Carter Ham, said publicly just this week that al-Qaeda is operating terrorist training camps in northern Mali and providing arms, explosives, and financing to other terrorist groups in the region. So I believe it's critical that the United States have a strong and comprehensive policy to deal with this threat. I'm concerned that the current U.S. approach may not be forward-leaning enough to address all three crises, security, political, and humanitarian, in a coordinated, comprehensive, and effective way at the same time. Given the compelling U.S. interest in stability and security and good governance in Mali, we must ensure we don't miss the bigger picture of what this situation means for the future of Mali, to our allies, and to our security. The UN Security Council is now considering what they call a concept of operations for an African-led military operation. The U.S. can and should play a more active role in supporting this and preventing the country from becoming a permanent home for extremists and a safe haven for terrorists. An active role, Mr. President, does not mean putting American boots on the ground. Instead, we can provide operational support for a regionally led, multilateral, African-led force being organized by ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, and the African Union. In the weeks ahead, the UN Security Council will likely vote on a resolution authorizing this coalition to lead a military intervention to dislodge the terrorists in the north. We've seen models like this work in Cote d'Ivoire and Somalia, so there's reason to believe in the potential of a regional military solution to the security crisis in the north. However, even if this intervention works, it will take time to train and equip and assemble the regional force and to develop the appropriate plans for what happens during and after a military intervention. And frankly, Mr. President, security and stability can't be restored to Mali with military action alone. The current crisis is as much about governance as it is about security. A stronger Malian democracy is the best way to ensure security and societal gains in the short term and the long term. But democracy doesn't just begin or end with an election. One of the reasons Mali's democracy crumbled so quickly was that Malians did not feel connected to or represented or well served by their government. Voter turnout in the last few elections was lower and lower, with the government viewed as corrupt, social services not benefiting the relatively sparsely populated north, and institutions nationwide that were weak. The political and security challenges in Mali are two sides of the same coin. They're not separate issues. So I will urge that we break down silos between departments and agencies in our government and take a comprehensive view. If we focus on the political only and insist on Mali moving forward briskly with an election, even when the security situation will prevent most northern Malians from meaningfully participating. I think we risk unintentionally strengthening the hands of those who want to ensure that Mali's regional divide is permanent and hand a symbolic victory to al-Qaeda. On the other hand, if we rush forward with a security solution, with a regional military intervention before it's adequately planned for, before they are responsibly trained and equipped, we risk defeat on that front as well. I think we can and should do better. We can work closely with our allies, with regional partners and the international community to address all the security, political, and humanitarian crises unfolding in Mali. Effective, inclusive elections early next year should be one goal, but not the only one. We also have to address the ongoing humanitarian crisis of the 400,000 displaced persons and refugees and the more than 4.5 million people in need of emergency food aid in the region, and the security crisis of terrorists controlling an area this large. To bring long-term peace and stability to Mali and to ensure northern Mali doesn't slide into being the base of operations for the next al-Qaeda attack on our allies, our interests abroad, or even the United States. We can't afford to ignore any of the pieces of this complex puzzle. Mr. President, the United States simply cannot afford, despite the many distractions and other priorities facing us, to ignore Mali. And I pledge to work in great partnership with my colleagues here in the Senate and my friends on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to ensure an effective engagement by the United States in this important area. Thank you, and with that I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week I came to the floor and spoke about our nation's military and intelligence leaders acknowledging, along with our nation's scientific leaders, the clear evidence that carbon pollution is changing our climate. Unfortunately, there continues to be some confusion among many Americans regarding the clear scientific consensus, but that is confusion caused by deliberate and coordinated attempts to mislead the American people. For more than 2 decades now, the climate denial movement has been well organized and funded by the fossil fuel industry and conservative ideologues and foundations. The mission of these paid-for deniers is to manufacture uncertainty, to manufacture doubt, so the polluters can keep on polluting. This isn't a new strategy. We've seen self-serving strategies like this before. These strategies question the merits of requiring seat belts in cars. They question CFCs causing deterioration of the ozone layer. They questioned the toxic effects of lead exposure for children. They questioned whether tobacco was really bad for you. Same strategy to manufacture doubt, often actually the same cast of characters involved. While the Congress of the United States has been distracted and deceived by these ploys, climate change marches on. The laws of chemistry and the laws of physics don't care about the nonsense we're up to in this building. They do what the laws of chemistry and physics say. Precious time is wasting. In the balance hang lives and jobs. This nonsense has gone on long enough. The public is being misled. Special interest dollars pulled the strings of sophisticated campaigns to give the public the impression that there is a real scientific debate regarding whether or not climate change is happening. Well, there isn't. There just isn't. The real scientific debate is about how bad the changes will be. Here's one example out of my home state's Warwick Beacon in an article entitled Sandy, a wake-up call to climate change. It describes the head of our Coastal Resources Management Council saying, he's talking about sea level rise. And here's what he says: I can tell you that it is real. I can't tell you how, hang on, I'm going to need my glasses to see this one. I can tell you that it is real. I can't tell you how fast or how bad it is. That's what I said. The real scientific debate is actually about how bad the changes are going to be. To manufacture doubt, to allow the polluters to keep polluting, skeptics with little training in climate science are promoted as experts. Front groups such as the Global Climate Coalition, Information Council for the Environment, Heartland Institute, Annapolis Center, and Cooler Heads Coalition are created or enlisted to propagate this message of doubt. Deniers question the motives and engage in harassment of the real, credentialed climate scientists. Well, for the record, there has been scientific debate regarding climate change. Ideas have been tested, theories have been ventured, and the evidence keeps coming back to the same conclusion. Increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from human-related sources is strengthening the greenhouse effect, adding to recent warming, and acidifying the oceans. Actually, the evidence coming in tends to confirm the worst and most dangerous projections. Mr. President, may I interrupt my remarks and ask unanimous consent that morning business be extended until 2 p.m. with senators permitted to speak there?